and they're not able to kind of really flow or grow with their child being different to them or having different opinions. And so that's kind of where I find a lot of the friction. And a lot of the parents who find it the easiest are the ones who embrace the fact that their kids might have different interests, might have different viewpoints as they do, and then kind of like being flexible with that, and then learning how to communicate and learning how to work with their child's differences. Those are the parents that I think find it the easiest. Now, I'm gonna say that I don't think any parent finds it super easy, but I think the ones who seem to have a flow and seem to have a lot more comfort with it are the ones who are a little bit more flexible, I feel.
But who are they studying? I mean, this study, who did they ask? Which parent ever finds raising any child easy,
Yeah. I don't think I can name any. Like, I don't think I know any of my parents, even the ones who are super close to their kids and rarely fight with their kids, they still find it challenging. Yeah. Like, I don't think I know anyone who thinks it's easy.
I think for me, like the most challenging parts are the boring parts, like having to like provide meals every day, feed them, like those the humdrum things. Just that's my insanity of like I can't cope. But going back to what you were saying about, so the parents that on the sort of the spectrum of going with the flow versus sort of being rigid to rules and regulations. I'm simplifying this. Somewhere in there is this sort of like disconnect with the fact that we were all teenagers once, right? So how does that happen? Why does that happen? Is it because it's beaten out of us? Like, are we damaged and broken by the time we have our kids that we don't remember what it's like?
We're just completely like jaded about life.
Yeah. No, we're like robots, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's just because we've outlived it, or we've lived past it, right? So the thing with teenagers is that, you know, you're dealing with a demographic that is growing neurologically, they're growing physically, they're experiencing a lot of what life has to offer for the first time. And I think they're also at this stage where they're kind of moving out of that phase where, you know, because when you are in sort of your primary years and below, you know, your mom and dad, your family is kind of like the main environment that you're involved in, right? So if anything, the only thing that matters is kind of what happens in that circle, in that bubble. But then once you become a teenager, you're starting to include sort of the social aspect into it a little bit more. They're starting to develop friendships and relationships outside of the family unit. They're allowed to go out and have friends outside of the home and have a life outside of the home. Some kids get part-time jobs. So they're kind of having this different bubble. And so the thing is, like, you know, they are experiencing things for the very first time. And the thing is, we've probably lived through everything that they're going through. And we've come to a point where ultimately, you know, your friends not wanting to be your friends is not catastrophic. You will live through it. Getting a bad grade is not catastrophic. You will live through it. We've gotten to that stage where we're kind of a little bit desensitized to the things that they've gone through. And so I find a lot of parents taking that stance where they tell their kids, oh, it's fine. Don't just get over it. It'll be okay. Right. But they can say that because they've lived through it. They have that experience. They know with certainty it's going to be okay. But kids don't. So I always tell parents to just forget what it's like to be an adult and have the answers, and remember that these kids don't have the answers. And you need to go through it with them instead of just telling them, because it's kind of like for us, if say, for example, we get told by someone that, everything is going to be fine. Your boss is not going to get mad. But until you have that conversation with your boss, you don't know if he's going to be mad or not. So it's kind of like that. So I think it's that we've kind of lived through it and we've kind of seen that it's not a big deal. And so we can't really appreciate or remember what it's like to be that terrified or that upset. So that's kind of where I feel it kind of breaks down a little bit.
This is just from my point of view, right? Is it better to have been a hard to deal with teenager so that when you have kids of your own and then when they become teenagers and then they're hard to deal with, you go, oh, right. So that's what my parents went through.
My grandmother just said it's karma to me.
Right. But in this case, like, is it like if you were like a really good teenager and you follow all the rules and everything, then your kid doesn't follow the rules. You're like, why is he or she like that? So is it about not relating to your kid?
I think a little bit. I think that if you are the kind of person who, has never really pushed the envelope, was very textbook, kind of followed the rules, you might find it very frustrating when your child doesn't, if your child doesn't, right? And I think that's kind of where your life experience inevitably affects your parenting. But where, like what Asha was saying, the flexibility element comes into it is when parents go, okay, I was not like this, but I'm willing to learn and understand what it's like to have a child like this and go through it with them, right? So my fiance has this joke that because I was such a budak baik, like I basically just did everything I was supposed to, that if we have a child who's out of the box, I'm so glad I have him because he's the polar opposite. So it really is kind of your life experience does impact it, right? So it's about whether or not you're willing to go with that change and go with that flow, or whether you're going to stick to your guns and expect your child to conform to you. That's the bit that I find, yeah.
So, okay, so that's like part of like how you're communicating with them, right? So is there a very simple thing that parents of teens can do that is what you can use every single time you need to have a conversation or broach a subject, whatever it is, that kind of puts you into the right frame of mind? I mean, I know with me, the things that I used to use when he was a bit younger, like just tweening, now don't work. So, you have to change your game. Otherwise,
Right.
they catch you at it, right? But
right. So be flexible.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, being flexible. I read this quote the other day that I think a lot of people listen for the purpose of answering, and not for the purpose of listening, right? And I think that when you're parenting a teen, that's so important. There is a step-by-step guide, which I actually teach a lot of my parents, about how to navigate conversations with teenagers. Because the first thing that you have to remember when dealing with a teenager is that despite how they look and despite how they might speak to you, neurologically, you're not on the same level. There is
psychopath. They are technically, they are honestly
The tiny little psychopath.
their brain is like a warring psychopath because they are so hormonal. I read that, it's scientific.
Yes,
right?
yes, they are extremely hormonal. And in addition to that, so there's anyone who's met me hears me talk about this because I find this so fascinating, but there's a region of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is basically, simply put, the front part of your head. And that part of your brain controls everything that makes us functional adults, right? So like our emotions, our planning, our organizational skills, and all that. And that part of the brain, and I'm sure, JD's heard me talk about this before, isn't fully mature till you're about 28. So when you are dealing with a 14-year-old, you're dealing with someone who is at 50% capacity in that region. So they haven't got the correct iOS update, right? And so when parents are sitting there trying to reason with their teen like they would with a peer, with another adult, right? That always fails, almost 100% of the time. So what I always tell parents is to take that out of the equation. Go into a conversation knowing that your child is not at the same level. And therefore, if they aren't able to get certain concepts, this common sense thing does not apply to them, don't get mad, right? Because this is normal. So kind of go into it with that mindset. And I find that really, really helps. The other thing is to also start with validating their emotions. So repeat what you see. So, I can see that you're kind of angry about this. I can see that you're kind of frustrated. So repeat what you see. Don't try to assume how they feel. Just read their body language, hear what they're saying, and sort of parrot back what you see. Because what you're doing is that you're allowing them to first and foremost hear that you are validating their emotions. Because the minute that you start being an adult and you're trying to tell them you don't need to feel this way, or you're trying to infer their opinions, a wall goes up and they go, you don't get me. We get you, kid. But, at that moment, they're like, you don't get me. So those are some of the initial things that I tell parents to do, is to just first and foremost, not kind of expect them to be able to respond the way that you do. Secondly, is to also validate their feelings by repeating what you see. And then, if they're upset or whatever, I would like to kind of jump in and say, okay, I can see that you're quite upset, and I really kind of want to help you feel a bit better. So tell me what I can do, right? So things like that. So give them the opportunity to tell you what they need and actually listen to it. Those are some of the things that I usually tell parents to try to remember.
We'll be back very shortly with another episode of Negotiating with Terrorists with it feels like
Yeah,
sometimes. And it's just like, you know, I think also when you're in overwhelm, you're, and I'm not very good at this all the time, but it is kind of like there are landmines everywhere. Go down this way. You don't understand. Go down that way. I hate you. It's like, and all you want to do is sort of get to that sort of sweet spot. And invariably, actually,
yeah.
it is. I don't know about you, but did you ever leave the room slamming the door?
Me? No.
Oh, but I think, I feel like they are it's just a scary time for them, and and I think a lot of adults do forget that, right? There's a lot of things that they can't control. Their hormones are bouncing all over the place. They're subject to so much peer pressure. And I think that we don't give our kids enough credit nowadays, because when we were growing up, social media didn't exist. It is, yeah, it is a really tricky time for them. But that being said, I feel for parents as well, because there really is no, even if we were to kind of reflect on or to refer back to our parents on how to raise teens, they don't even really know, because it's a different ball game nowadays altogether, right? So I feel like, I tell parents it's not easy. It takes a village. It really is true, right? But there are very sort of clear cut black and white techniques that we in therapy use a lot when we're dealing with teenagers. In fact, I have a book that I'm looking up to that actually really helps. It was based on it was a technique, a step-by-step technique, and I want to pull it down. I don't know if I can. So it's following stuff like this. So it's giving parents a very simple framework on what to do. You are human. If you get upset, it's okay, right? You're not supposed to be Yoda Zen master all the time. So if you get up, or ever. Yeah. So these are not the drones you're looking for. So if you're not able to stay calm and things get explosive, just remember that you can always go back to it. If a conversation doesn't go the way that you wanted, take some time, get some space, and then when things are calmer, do go back to them and just be like, hey, so I kind of wanted to talk to you about what happened earlier. I'm really, really sorry that things got to that level, but I'm really interested to know kind of how you feel. Because I think that that's something that a lot of parents don't do enough, is that when things get explosive, they kind of leave it and then expect it, and then just kind of be super nice, or they just kind of like leave it and then get back to things, life as usual. But you can always go back to it. So that's what I would say.